This is the business of Africa. If it's about Africa, then it's our business. So I recently visited a major retailer in Johannesburg looking for garlic. I almost fainted when I saw the Made in China label. It got me thinking about our food ecosystems on the African continent. Are we trading enough with each other when it comes to agriculture? What are some of the noteworthy successes in the space, and what are the challenges of moving food? Do we have capable transport infrastructure, road, rail and air? Hammond Motsi is a PhD student in agriculture at Stellenbosch University. He joins us to hopefully answer some of these questions. Hammond, thank you very much for your time. How would you characterize the agricultural landscape on the African continent? A very big continent, and so I'm not even sure if that's a fair question.
Okay, let me on the outset say that Africa consumes what it doesn't produce, and it produces what it doesn't consume. Referring to your issue of that you find garlic made of China here in Africa. So agriculture faces a big challenge here in Africa, but it's not one size fits all. Each and every country has got its downfalls and successes. So, for instance, if we talk about South Africa, I think South Africa is found major successes rather than downfalls on its agriculture. But the rest of other countries, I think they're facing a lot of downfalls rather than successes. The challenge is being number one, the issue of governance, right? It doesn't affect agriculture only, but it affects the whole dynamics of African development. And then agriculture is included in those. And then there is less support of agriculture supporting farmers with incentives, supporting farmers with equipping them with enough knowledge, introduction of modern technologies which are being used in agriculture, as well as adapting to other dynamics which are happening, such as geopolitics, climate change, and so forth.
Okay, fair enough. When we take a look, maybe let us try and do a number of countries, right? Let's go to our neighbors. Zimbabwe, for instance, it was known as the breadbasket of the African continent. Today, the narrative is that sanctions has hurt Zimbabwe. And yes, maybe there's an argument to be made about that. However, is there another argument to be made around agriculture that it could possibly rise again to be the breadbasket of Africa? What would it take to get that right? More so when you speak of governance.
All right. Yeah, thanks very much for this question. I'm also from Zimbabwe, so I'm capable of answering the question adequately. So the issue of breadbasket of Africa in Zimbabwe occurs during the period before the land reform of 2000 took place. So during that time, it was dominantly the white farmers who were doing the whole agriculture, and there were something like 2.5 to 3,000 who were taking care of the agriculture. Of course, the agriculture was a success because the government by that time was supporting the white farmers. So when the land reform took place, I can say Zimbabwe went under a revolution, and there's no revolution which is smooth. Every revolution has got consequences, has got challenges. So that's what exactly happened in Zimbabwe. And then from that period of 2000, we saw a downward trend in agricultural production up until the country could not even feed itself, and then it was looking for food somewhere. But later on, what I think now is happening is that people, because it's about 25 years now since that land reform has happened, but people are now getting used to how to farm, right? So I can give an instance of tobacco in Zimbabwe. Tobacco is a success. Zimbabwe is the number one top producer of tobacco, is number 5 in the world, and then that tobacco brings something about 1 billion per annum in terms of foreign currency to the country. So there is a success there. And then now coming back to the issue of governance, it is definitely number one problem of Zimbabwe, why the agriculture is not being optimized on the country. So the issue of governance, the issue of policies which can't create a proper environment for farmers to sustain their production is really a big problem in Zimbabwe, and mostly the monetary policies. So in Zimbabwe, there's a problem of money. people doesn't even know exactly the money they use. So if we come back to the issue of tobacco is auctioned at an international market. So it finds it attractive to the farmers because they sell it in US dollars and then they get their money. So that's what another challenge. So if they created policy or environment like what is happening in tobacco to other crops, I believe Zimbabwe can go back to the Africa breadbasket status.
It will take will, I guess, for that to be realized. If we come back to an example maybe of if you go to Yeovil, you will find cassava, you will find plantain, you will find fruits and vegetables that you wouldn't ordinarily find at a major retailer, for instance, in South Africa. How is it that we are able to bring in certain kind of produce, but we're not able to bring in others?
So some of the things, it also depends on the consumer perceptions, like what is it the consumer's likes or wants. So that would be a major effect. And then some of the things, also some of the crops or food that can be produced, it depends if the countries are capable of producing them. So if you look, for instance, here in South Africa, you find that there are crops which are dominantly produced in the Western Cape rather than the other parts of South Africa, and then the opposite also because of the climate. So sometimes it can be the climate that people are failing to produce it in under these climates and so forth. But again, it doesn't factor out the issue of governance, because now there's been advanced technology where you can grow anything anywhere. There are modern technologies in terms of tunnels or greenhouses. You can grow anything or anywhere, but it also takes the governance will or the support from the government for people to have those kind of such modern technology.
How much arable land do we have on the continent? Do we know?
I am not sure about the exact number, but what I know is Africa has got the largest arable land in comparison to other countries, and it also has the largest deposits of fresh water, right, which can be used in agriculture. We have a lot of dams, we have a lot of rivers flowing all over the continent, but it's not utilized. So another factor also is is that about 30% of the arable land is the one which is only utilized for agriculture, and 70% is not utilized. So there's this, I don't know it's a myth or what, but it is said that the DRC, that DR Congo, which is at the middle of Africa where those wars are happening, they're saying if the whole land, agricultural land, is utilized only in Congo, it can feed almost all the continent, everyone, 1.2 billion people on the continent. So although it can be overemphasized, but it can give us the picture on how underutilized is the land in Africa, and if it's utilized, what can it bring?
So that also brings up the issue of not just food security, but security. We'll get into that in a few moments. But if we assess per region, whether it's the East African community, the North African community, Central African community, West African community, or Southern African community, which region is trading equitably amongst each other when it comes to agriculture?
Yeah, the issue of regional trade or regional economy, it's one of the important things which is lacking in Africa, and it's one of the issue which has been extensively discussed in the Agenda 2063, that we are not trade among us itself. So what you found like the best performing region, I think it's Southern Africa, right? And then South Africa being number one, and then there is Tanzania, there is also a boom in Mozambique. And then, I think when it comes to this region, those three countries are much competitive. And then if we go to the north, to North Africa, those Maghreb or Arabic countries, the Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, they also perform very well in their agriculture, and they also trade very well that side. But other regions like the East Africa, Central Africa, and then West Africa, they still suffer a lot of consequences. The most being the security issue, this militant group, the wars which are happening, and so forth, being the major factor which is affecting the agriculture and its trade.
Again, security or insecurity playing a part here. What are some of the barriers to trade, right? Because every December, I think many news channels in South Africa, at least, will be at the border post and they'll show you the crossings in terms of people who are moving from one country to another. And you don't just witness the people that are moving, right? But you see the trucks that are back to back and that are waiting in queues for hours, truck drivers incessantly complaining about the queues that they have to face. And so what are some of the challenges, right, in terms of moving food? Maybe let's start with Southern Africa, in terms of tariffs, in terms of trucks being able to cross borders, etc.
Yeah, I think you have already said the first one, which is the tariffs. And also it has to do with the taxes. So it's actually a big problem which is affecting trade in Africa, and then that Africa free trade agreement also has been established to fill that gap. So the other thing which is also a big problem is the efficiency, right? Which also comes back to the governance issue. So if you found that on borders you'll be having a lot of queues and so forth, and then things are delayed, the truck drivers, they take long hours processing papers, processing passport and so forth, which overall affect the movement of goods in time. So efficiency is another factor. And then another factor will be infrastructure, and dominantly it's the road infrastructure. Our roads remains as bad in other parts of the region, the exception of South Africa. I think South Africa is one of the best roads on the continent, but in other countries, when you go to Zimbabwe, when you go to Botswana and so forth, it's also another challenge. So it will take long period for those goods or food to be delivered.
And that has a cost to it, right? So there's an economic downside to it because it has a particular shelf life.
Yeah, of course. Of course, it will be having large consequences.
Has the African Continental Free Trade Area actually plugged the gap or filled the gap? 5 years into it, has it done something, or is it too early to tell?
I don't think we have seen much of its results currently, or maybe it's still yet to come. But for this moment, I don't think there's nothing much which is happening, which is a cause of its establishment. There's nothing much which has changed, and it comes back to the will of the leaders or the people, that are they agreeing to each other, or they are just interested in going to those conferences where they will be saying like, yeah, we need to do this, we need to do this, but on the ground it is the opposite. So I don't think there's much which has been achieved in that area of that Africa Free Trade Agreement.
You mentioned that the continent has vast land for agriculture, vast arable land. You also mentioned that we're only using 30% of it, right? So are we operating only at 30% capacity? Could we operate at 90% capacity or 70% capacity? Is it possible?
Yes, it's possible to improve our capacity as long as the fundamentals are respected. Okay. So agriculture, it's a principle. So a principle needs to be respected in terms of its fundamentals. So that comes to the issue of governance again, right? That's where it fits in on what is it we can do for us to efficiently utilize all our land to 100% or at 90%. So we can reach that capacity, but it can't be without respecting the fundamentals in place.
Can we do more in terms of, for instance, coconut? You go to a number of West African countries. They've got some of the best fruits you have ever tasted, right? So let's start with coconut, for instance. Is it possible to get coconut coming from Ghana to South Africa and not necessarily using road, especially when we think about agricultural products that have a shelf life, right? Are we not able to use air travel because we are opening up spaces where that is concerned as well?
Yeah, I think we can do that. We can do that. Other continents are doing something like that. If you look at Europe, right, it's easy to transport the goods within the countries from one country to the next. So even here in Africa, we can do that as long as we respect the fundamentals, as long as we put in place policies which are easy for such kind of business to operate.
You mentioned insecurity and agriculture. How should we understand it? Help us to thread or link the two, insecurity and moving food on the continent.
Okay, let me start with certain statistics on the issue of security and how it's linked to food security or food insecurity. Mm-hmm. So we have about 54 countries in the continent with a population of about 1.3, 1.4 billion. Mm-hmm. But there is Nigeria, there is Ethiopia, there is DRC, Congo, right? These three countries, they have a population of about 500 million people, which is 1/3 of the continent, right? These three countries, right, are the country with the most conflicts which are happening on the continent. So what you find is that in DRC, there are about 30 million people who are food insecure, chronically food insecure because of the security issue there. You go again in Ethiopia, there are about 20 million people. You go to Nigeria, there are about 25 million people who are food insecure, right? So it becomes a problem that these countries which are holding a large population are the ones which are mostly into conflict, and it comes back to the issue of agriculture and food security. So now, how does security issue affect food security? It's very simple. So with those militia groups, right, you can't do any agriculture when war is happening, right? Those guys can just attack the farmers, right? They attack the farmers when the farmers have some things in the field or they have their livestock. Those guys, they just go and grab those things, right? People can't go to the market because they are scared. And if you look at the demographics only, who goes to the market to sell the things? They are women, right? They are women and girls. Those are the most people who sell agricultural products. So a lot of them, they can't go there because they are scared of being raped, they are scared of being abused because they are at a disadvantages in those war-torn countries, right? So generally, there's no agriculture which can take place in those conflicts because people are just running away. There are no roads which can be built such that our delivery systems will be efficient. So that's how security issue affects the food security.
It's heartbreaking, I guess, for lack of a better word, because as you mentioned earlier on, the assertion that the Democratic Republic of Congo, you fixed that, you fixed the continent's hunger problem, you fixed that, you fixed the continent. And so people who have not just the land, but who have, the capability to do it are not able to do it. When we speak about seeds, there was a lot of, more so during the war in Ukraine when it started, that a country at war is supplying countries on the continent that are not at war in terms of seeds. Help us to understand that, how that works.
Yeah, because we are not producing anything here in Africa. We just wait to consume something which is produced elsewhere. And then I can also give you an example of Israel. Israel exports oranges to Kenya. Kenya, I think it's 50 times bigger than Israel. Israel is very, very small, and it's only 9% of the whole country, which is arable, but it has got a lot of sophisticated technology which can thrive under such desert conditions. And now it exports oranges to Kenya. Kenya oranges are tropical fruits, and Kenya is in that tropical region, but they can't produce oranges which they can feed. So that's the thing, that's the issue, that's the challenge, that we continue export food out elsewhere. And it was really embarrassing that we continue getting food from Ukraine and Russia, which are war-torn countries. Conflict is happening there. But here on the continent, where maybe we can excuse those countries which are in conflict, the rest are not in conflict, and they can't produce food to feed themselves.
Cocoa, chocolate. I just had a slab of chocolate, and you look at it and you see where it is made. Talk us through the value chain. So when it lands on your hands, how did it get there?
Yeah, that issue is topical actually, and it comes back again on the first statement. I said that Africa produced what it doesn't consume and consume what it doesn't produce. So what you see in those crops like cocoa and tobacco in Zimbabwe, and tea in Kenya, yeah, those are cash crops, right, which are grown on the continent and then they're exported as raw material, right? So what you find is, like, for instance, in Ghana and Ivory Coast, that's where the cocoa is mostly produced, right? In fact, 70% of all the cocoa in the world. So they say something like at every dollar which the farmers get after producing the cocoa, right? When it's exported to Switzerland, England, France, there, and then it's processed, right? When it comes back, it will be 24 times than when it was sold by the farmers. And you find out that the same, it even comes back to Ghana, where it's produced, with these exorbitant prices. So that's another thing we lack in Africa, value added addition, right? I'm always also criticizing the issue of Zimbabwe, that despite the fact that tobacco is bringing so much money as a raw material, why is it that it produces such money? Why is it so attractive to the world, right? That they come and leave $1 billion in this poor country, right? So if we look at the value chain, right, what is it we can do for us to process it such that we can even get more? Maybe those guys that are buying it for 1 billion, and then now when they are selling whatever the products made from that tobacco, it's more than 30 billion. So it's another big issue of value addition. Even if you look at Kenya, also again, it exports the tea to Britain, and then when it comes back here in Africa, it will be English tea. But those guys, they don't even know how does a plant or a tree which makes this tea comes from. The same thing in Switzerland. They don't even have a bush of cocoa, but the best chocolate you find in this world is the Swiss chocolate, right? Very expensive, very flash, but people, they don't know where that cocoa is coming from. And even if you look down the value chain where it's produced, the issue of abuse of children, abuse of women, abuse of people who are getting nothing from that. So it's another thing which needs to be addressed, and it comes back to the issue of governance. What are the policies you are introducing such that the whole value chain should be sustainable to the country?
And I laugh not because it's so funny, but it's so tragic, right? And so I guess in concluding the conversation, your solution, governance, because we are not poor. Perhaps we are poor in leadership.
Exactly. Governance. Everything starts and ends with the governance. As long as we have poor governance systems, there's nowhere we are going. In governance, that's when we change things to be proper to work for people.
Hammond, we hopefully will have a second edition of this conversation because there's quite a lot that we also didn't cover. But thank you very much for, as a start, helping us make sense of this very important issue. Hammond Motsi is a PhD student in agriculture at Stellenbosch University. And that's it for this week's Business of Africa podcast episode, where we bring big and small business matters right to your doorstep. Do catch us again in the next fortnight, God willing. Mahaichu. Bulakio.